for Margaret Gardner. You got the slave that came out of Boone County. Who speaks for the slave? They had race riots in Cincinnati. They had race riots against the Germans and the Irish in Louisville. Isn't that big of a surprise? In rural Gallatin County, they would have a race riot there too. And a race riot wasn't like the race riots of today, where black folks sort of, torch their own communities. But now it's back then it was white people would go into black neighborhoods just killing willy-nilly. Tulsa, they actually were dropping bombs everywhere by plane. So that's what the race riots used to be. And so, these WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestants, this is a legacy that they want to hold. The 1855 Know-Nothing riots in Louisville, right? It happens in the mid-1850s. You have the Germans who came over here from the 1848ers, the Irish who came over here because of the potato famine. And then 1856, it's also right before the Civil War that happened too. So you got there's no way there was a massive German, not massive. Actually, I have a chart here. It talks about how much how many Germans actually come into America, and looking at the chart, you see that there was a lot of people that come in the my ancestors come in 1869. But there's way more people coming in like 1880s. And so that was when most Germans had come. So really it was a consistent just German-Irish immigration from the 1830s up until the 1900s. And I can't find it offhand, and I'm not doing this German book yet. It's going to be my finale. I just want to tell you every piece of information that you would ever need to know about the 1855 Know-Nothing riots of Louisville. So I have this, and that, and that, and that should be done. Okay, so February 16th, 1856, says Margaret Gardner, she kills her own daughter to prevent her from going back into slavery. She was from Boone County, Kentucky. She crosses the Ohio River. She's in Cincinnati. The authorities, including the city police. And so it's interesting how this actually all breaks down. So she kills her own daughter. Then they have a big call celebrate about who it is. So in Cincinnati, which was different than Baltimore and Chicago and some of the other places, that they actually did not elect their know-nothing mayor, so they didn't get a know-nothing mayor. Here in Louisville, the know-nothings won power, but in Cincinnati, the know-nothings had lost. So they went into the German neighborhood, burning the ballots, but they had invalidated that action, and they declared the Democrat the winner. So that's what the know-nothings did in Cincinnati. So it only kind of shows you how policies matter, how voting the right person in position of power matters at the time. Because if that Margaret Gardner story would have happened in Louisville, it was a know-nothing mayor, he probably would have just said to give her the death penalty. Who gives a shit? But because it happened in Cincinnati, they actually went to see what was, what's right and what's not right. The Fugitive Slave Act is a federal policy, and if the feds get involved and they want the city employees or whatever, then you have to go through the proper procedure. But for a city cop to join in on the fugitive chase, that's just he was doing it on his own accord. And so eventually we're going to find out how, the sharing of power breaks down. So the slave case at Cincinnati, the grand jury at Cincinnati had found a true bill for murder against Peggy, that's Margaret Gardner, as a principal, and the rest of the adult Kentucky fugitive slaves as accessories. So they're sitting there saying that she had murdered the kids, so therefore they're going to try her for murder. But that's somebody's property. So is she a human? Can a piece of property murder somebody else? And can a piece of property murder another piece of property? Right? Does she have any stake in the matter? Does she have? If it's just property, then there is no murder. No murder would happen, because you can't. I guess murder could happen, but I could take your cow and kill your cow. The tragedy for the courts, yeah, I murdered a cow, and that is inhumane and psycho. But we all eat meat, right? So. But the inhumanity more so is the stealing of the property. So that means Margaret Gardner shouldn't be tried for murder if, back in the slave state. So this is really just a way for the abolitionists to kind of confuse everybody, but it's important to confuse everybody because it's fucking bullshit what they're doing. But they're sitting there saying their argument was that since Margaret Gardner was property, you cannot try her for murder. You could only try her for thievery, for stealing property from the master, because that child, was property of the master. So therefore, she didn't actually kill. She killed a cow, right? They weren't known as humans, so they were basically just, you stole property that was a living thing. You had murdered that living thing, but it's not, it's property, so it didn't matter. Anyways, That's the fucking argument. The whole thing's stupid. But the slave case in Cincinnati, they're saying that all the fugitives that actually ran with them were going to be implicated. So they were going to say that all of them, right, they're going to charge all of them with murder. But they're property, so how can you charge property with murder? The writ was placed at the hands of the sheriff who, when the fugitives were brought to jail by the marshal for safekeeping, turned the key upon them, and now they're in his possession. The case grows more and more complicated. No decision has been made as to the ownership of the slaves. Charleston Daily Courier, February 18, 1856. In consequence of the frequent occurrence of runaway slave troubles in Cincinnati, the mayor of the city has seen proper to address written instructions to the chief of police and his subordinates on the subject of their course on such occasions. He considers that the action of the United States authorities under the fugitive slave law should not be interfered with, but nevertheless an indictment of any of the slaves or other parties by a grand jury is evidence that the case demands the attention of the state tribunals, and hence the police must render all possible aid in executing the state process. February 25, 1856, Cincinnati fugitives. Mayor J.J. Farron of Cincinnati, that was the Democrat, right? So it's not a know-nothing mayor. We got J.J. Farron in there, the Democrat. He was discharged to the city police. So he fires 2 city police officers for aiding in the capture of the fugitive slaves now on trial in that city. The mayor holds that the city police has nothing to do with fugitive slaves unless called upon by the United States officers to aid them in arresting or retaining custody of such fugitives. Since they did not ask him, he had done it on his own. He holds that any man who will neglect his regular business and assist in hunting up runaway slaves without authority of law for the sole purpose of obtaining a reward is unfit to be a city policeman. It's from Plain Dealer. Charleston Mercury, February 25th, 1856. So, Margaret Gardner, that happened in 1856, right? So that's right before the big Civil War happens. History of the city of Columbus. Basically, it was just they were carrying a flag, and then the people started throwing rocks, and then it just fucking escalates. So it seems like if you're looking for a fight, if 2 gangs or 2 mobs of people are looking for a fight, it's easy for the fight to happen. March through the fucking streets, throw some rocks, tell them to take the flag down, don't take the flag down, insult them, you know, mock them, try to hit them, you know, go up, push them. There's lots of ways to start a fight, right? So that's just the beginning of the Columbus in 1855 had know-nothing riots happening. This is what happened. It was basically mostly stone throwing. It seems like I haven't found any where it says that there was murder or it was broke out, you know, the way that it broke out at in Louisville. In Boston, Baltimore, Wheeling, St. Louis, and Cincinnati, you had Nuncio, right, Bedini, the fucking cardinal archbishop. He was, who's cardinals above the bishops, right? So the cardinal is actually bigger than the bishop. But they took part in various solemn religious celebrations. There were scenes of disorders, in some cases of bloodshed, provoked by the know-nothing speakers, both lay and clerical, as well by the anti-Catholic press. Cincinnati, December 1853, a mob of 600 men armed with weapons of various sorts and carrying lighted torches and ropes marched to the cathedral intending to set it on fire, as was believed to hang the nuncio. There was an encounter with the police. The mob was dispersed, but not until after shots had been fired. Several persons wounded during 1854. There are numerous assaults upon Catholic churches throughout the country by the know-nothing element. St. Mary's Church of Newark, New Jersey was invaded by a mob made up of know-nothings and orange men from New York City. The windows were broken. The statuary destroyed. One unoffending bystander, an Irish Catholic, was shot and killed. In October the same year at Ellsworth, Maine, Father John Baptist S.J. was dragged from the church, robbed of his watch and money, tarred and feathered, and ridden about the village on a rail. Damn. July 4th, Manchester, New Hampshire, St. Anne's Church was attacked, its windows broken and furniture destroyed. The priest compelled to seek shelter away from his home, and houses of Irish Catholics were likewise attacked, the inmates driven out, even the sick being dragged from their beds at Bath. The mob broke from the church. Let's see, okay. The 35th Congress, which assembled in December 1855, just to give you the breadth of the 1855 Know-Nothing movement. In 1856, Horace Greeley wrote the majority of the Banks men, Banks being the candidate for Speaker of the House of Representatives, are now members of Know-Nothing councils, and some 20 or 30 of them are actually believing that swindle. Half of the Massachusetts delegation, 2/3 of that of Ohio, and nearly all of Pennsylvania are Know-Nothings. In 1855, the Know-Nothing Party suffered a serious reverse in Virginia when Henry A. Wise, the Democratic candidate, was elected governor of that state, chiefly on the issue of his antagonism to the Know-Nothing principles and policies. 1856 at Philadelphia, the delegates of the Know-Nothing Party held a convention which they nominated Millard Fillmore as candidate for president. Opposed to them in that election were the Democratic Party and the newly organized Republican Party, both of whom had expressed their dissent from Know-Nothing principles. Speaking of the selection, Schaller says their candidate Fillmore met with the most ignoble defeat, receiving only the 8 electoral votes of Maryland. His adversary, James Buchanan, the nominee of the National Democratic Party, being triumphantly elected for the Know-Nothings with their prescriptive tenets. The defeat was overwhelming. It was apparent that the Know-Nothing Party had now nearly evaporated. So there's a climatic rise and then crash, right? So you have riots in Columbus and Cincinnati and St. Louis and New Orleans and Chicago and then Louisville. You have, in 1855, you had riots in all those cities, but you had riots in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore and Philadelphia, in, you know, the 1844 Philadelphia, but the other 1850s. So the 1850s was exploding with Know-Nothing riots all over the place. As well, the 1850s was basically the heyday of the Know-Nothing Party. That's when they got their president elected, 1850 to 53, Millard Fillmore. That's when they got all the governors and they got all the power, but then the fucking Civil War came out of nowhere and basically smashed the Know-Nothings up into pieces, or actually the Know-Nothings became the fucking Confederates. There's a Christmas riot, right? We just talked about it, but this is the Germans and the Irish clash. So this is the Germans going against the Irish Catholics. So just to make it, you know, in Louisville, it was an anti-foreign element. The Know-Nothings just hated everybody. But here in Cincinnati, the Germans are actually protesting against the Irish Catholics. You know, they hated foreigners and they hate Catholics. So why do you have to be, you know, it's like doubling up. It's like, wow, come on. And a lot of the Germans were 1848ers, the revolutionaries who were against the Jesuits and the Pope and the papacy and the oppression and the Spanish Inquisition and all the violence and the bullshit that the Catholic Church had been guilty of for years. In December 1853, visited by a disliked papal emissary, the Cardinal Bedini incites a demonstration by a group of radical Germans who had fled Europe after the papacy helped to violently suppress the liberal democratic movements that swept the continent in 1848 and 49. So the Catholic Church was against the 1848 revolutions. The 1848 revolutions is very indicative because it shows when revolution spreads out in many places and diffuses in many places, and then they had lost. We could have learned from that with Occupy. The revolution is kind of here. Russell Brand is sort of right, but it's not inevitable. Hunter S. Thompson thought that the revolution was inevitable. There was a child of the 60s, the hippie power, the hippie movement, right? That was going to change the world and become different, but then they run to the establishment and the crest, the high water mark eventually goes down, and none of the freedom and none of the thing. It was Nixon. It was the anti-war movement that ended Vietnam, but it was Nixon who ended Vietnam. It was the establishment. It was the people in power. So, and then he was shamed out of office, right? So he ended Vietnam, which he didn't have to. Why not the Christmas riot? So this German riot happens in 1853 against the Irish Catholics because they were marching against Cardinal Bedini, and they had used violence in order to suppress the 1848 revolutions. And the revolution started in France, diffused to Germany, in 50 different countries, including some in the Americas. I think Colombia or Cuba or somewhere. Maybe Brazil, I don't know. The mayor of Cincinnati calls in the police force, largely Irish immigrants, to handle the situation, right? So you have the protest of the German radicals, and then they call Irish immigrants, a bunch of poor fucking Mick bastards who want and need a job here. You're a fucking cop now. And then they go, oh yeah, we're fucking cops, and we're going to kick your German ass. You don't like us Catholics, well fuck you. But so it's genius of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you know, the English, to sort of pit the fucking Irish against the Germans when really there's one specific group of people who have been violent and murdering people for fucking generations in this country. And it's the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. It's the fucking Protestants. The Anglo of the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner was to vow that you had been a Protestant your whole fucking life and that you would only vote for fucking Protestants. It's a Bible riot. It's very much Bible riot. So it's I will say Bible riots because there is a Protestant versus Catholicism, but also an atheism versus religion. And a foreignism versus sort of, you know, it's an immigrant nation. Shut the fuck up. Let us all live here. Know Nothing riots, a crisis in nativism. Nativist, anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic protesters, part of a much larger national movement, attempt to fix an election in their party's favor by stealing ballot boxes in German voting wards. They go to fucking over the Rhine and they try to fucking steal the ballot boxes. That's what these white Anglo-Saxon Protestants did. And they probably do the same shit to fucking over the Rhine now. Exploiting that shit, right? They'll take the votes, but they ain't gonna take care of the community.